The Arab League holds an emergency meeting over violence in Jerusalem as Israel braces for further escalation and debates new measures to prevent it. This as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry plans to meet Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat to discuss reviving the frozen peace process. Israel closes its last two crossings into the Gaza Strip, leaving the coastal enclave even more isolated in the face of a massive new buffer zone being built on the Egyptian side. And Ukraine's military reports intensive troop movement from Russia into disputed regions in the east, where pro-Russian separatists are holding a controversial election that Moscow has vowed to uphold.
The News Today with Lucy Aharish.
Good evening. Welcome to the News Today. We've been bringing you the latest from Jerusalem as events have unfolded and the tension has mounted. Today, the issue moved outside of the city to an emergency meeting of the Arab League. The bloc issued a warning that Israel has reached a red line. That line is presumably a closing of the Temple Mount or Al-Aqsa compound this past Thursday to prevent the already volatile site from becoming a flashpoint for more violence. And though the Israeli Prime Minister has called for restraint, it didn't stop far right-wing parliament member Moshe Feiglin from visiting the Temple Mount today. On Monday, amid very tense ties between Jerusalem and Washington, the discussion will move to the State Department, where U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry is set to meet with Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat on the way forward. And we will go tonight to our correspondent in Jerusalem, Shai Ben Ari, Lea Bardugo, and Sami Abu Diab. But first, let's take a look back.
احنا كشعب فلسطيني لا يمكن ان نسلم لهذا العدو بما يقوم به تجاه مسجدنا الاقصى وتجاه المقدسات الاسلاميه والمسيحيه في القدس.
ירושלים היא בירתה של מדינת ישראל ולא נוכל לסבול את טרור שמתקיים בה.
הקהילה הבינלאומית צריכה להפסיק את הצביעות שלה ולפעול נגד המסיתים, אלה שמנסים לשנות את הסטטוס קוו. קל מאוד להצית אש דתית, הרבה יותר קשה לכבותה. המסרים האלה עברו בצורה החדה ביותר, גם לאבו מאזן ולכל הגורמים.
And with me on set is Middle East analyst Avi Sachalov. Good evening. Thank you very much for coming.
Lucy.
And former Deputy Foreign Minister of Israel, Danny Ayalon, Ambassador Ayalon. Thank you very much for coming. So, gentlemen, now it got out of Israel. Now maybe it's going to reach a solution or another meeting of the Arab League for talking, and the situation will stay the same.
My wild guess is that the situation will remain the same more or less for the next couple of weeks or months till we will see if there's any kind of negotiations or resumptions of the negotiations by John Kerry, by the United States administration. I think that we shouldn't be too panicked because of the emergency meeting of the Arab League. I think that I don't remember the last time that one of the meetings wasn't an emergency
meeting. Yes, of course. So if we're talking about maybe the situation from Israel, Israel's taking this seriously or saying it's another emergency meeting?
No, Israel is taking it very seriously because they don't want it here, the government, to get things out of hand, because things can easily slide into the south side with more violence. And of course, no solution will come out of the emergency meetings of the Arab League, and unfortunately, it will not come out of any outside factors. It can only come with either understanding here that we need to keep the status quo. It's not about Jerusalem right now. It's about, I think, the Palestinians' interest to keep in the world agenda their issue. Right now, they are very much afraid that Daesh, ISIS, and Ukraine, and Iran, take the focus, and they are being on the sideline without any progress. This is why I guess the next we're going to talk about Arikat going to Washington. They are trying every way they can to keep their issue on the agenda. One of them is violence in Jerusalem.
By the way, Lucy, a very important remark that we need to pay notice to. Today, Benjamin Netanyahu announced that all sides need to be calm and show restraint and not going to the Temple Mount, etc., etc. A couple of hours later, the President Mahmoud Abbas published an announcement saying that that statement was welcomed by the Palestinians. I think that both sides right now are trying to calm down the situation and to wait before getting into a third uprising.
Before we will continue talking about maybe some kind of a reconciliation between the Palestinians and the Israelis. It's only the beginning of the week and already many developments to follow in Jerusalem. Here's I-24 News correspondent Nelly Ochenberg with a roundup of today's latest.
The riots resumed in Jerusalem throughout the weekend after the Temple Mount was reopened Friday morning. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu pledged the prayer arrangement will not be changed while calling for restraint.
We are determined to maintain the status quo for all religions to prevent the eruption of riots in the Temple Mount and around it.
It was the first time in over 10 years that Israeli authorities shut all access to the holy site following the assassination attempt last Wednesday of the Jewish activist Yehuda Glick. But despite the Prime Minister's call to refrain from provocation, Moshe Feiglin, a right-wing lawmaker, arrived Sunday morning at the site under heavy guard, declaring the status quo on the Temple Mount will not be maintained.
I call the Prime Minister to change this attitude and to open the mountain to every Jew who wants to come and in a peaceful way to pray to God at his holiest site.
Outside of Jerusalem, the Arab League is getting involved as well, holding an emergency meeting to discuss, among other regional issues, what the League defines as violations against the Al-Aqsa Mosque by Israel. Jordan's King Abdullah also related to the issue at the opening of the Jordanian parliament, saying his country will not allow Israel to make unilateral moves in Jerusalem. But maybe more importantly, amid the tense ties between Israel and the U.S., American Secretary of State John Kerry will meet Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat Monday to discuss how to advance the frozen peace process and lowering strains in Jerusalem. Kerry may be aiming at reviving Israeli-Palestinian talks, but these days it will be even more difficult to lure the sides back to the negotiating table, as Palestinian Authority President Mahmoud Abbas is promoting a unilateral move at the United Nations and plans to ask the Security Council to set a timetable to, quote, end the Israeli occupation and force Israel to withdraw from the West Bank. In the meantime, the attempts to control the violent spirits in Israel's capital and its holy sites will resume.
You know, more than to say that the Arab League asked the UN to act on this current issue with Jerusalem, which is pretty funny, can I say? But let's talk about something maybe a little bit cynical, maybe a little bit funny. It's about John Kerry really thinking that he can revive the peace process between the Israelis and the Palestinians. Is it a real move? Is it something that, is it the reality of what we're seeing?
Look, I know that we made out of John Kerry the punch bag of Israel, of the Palestinians, of everyone. Everyone are mocking and laughing at him. He is trying. And right now, you know, without John Kerry, we're heading into a real escalation. We're heading into some kind of confrontation between the two sides, meaning if there won't be any initiative, if there won't be some kind of a settlement between Israel, the PA, and the US, meaning that the Palestinian Authority will go to the Security Council, from there to the General Assembly, from there to the international organization, declare Palestine as a state under occupation, and stop the security coordination. So the Israeli interest right now is that John Kerry will sweat in order to bring some kind of negotiations between the two sides. Otherwise, in 6 months, we're going to head into a direct confrontation.
You know, I need to understand, what is the problem of Israel that the Palestinians will actually go and announce a Palestinian state? What will be the big problem? Because on the ground, we see that it's all in one way or another, it is a state. They have a military, they have their offices, they have everything that it needed to be a country in one. They have security arrangement with their neighbors. So what is the problem of Israel that the Palestinians will go and say, okay, it's about them, we will declare a country?
Well, Lucy, the problem is not the declaration itself, but the venue or the forum, the Security Council, because the declaration was already made and voted in the affirmative way by 138 countries in the General Assembly, in other organizations, but this is meaningless because the General Assembly, although the resolutions there, have only declaratory force. It's not mandatory. Security Council is something else. And with the Security Council, also, Israel is not in a position to try the United States and to have the United States isolated against all the other members. So this is a much more complex issue where Israel would like to do anything in its power to make, and also the United States, to avoid a vote in the Security Council.
In a case that it gets to the Security Council, in a case that, let's say, the worst case scenario for Israel, the Palestinians will get the declaration of a state, what does it mean for Israel?
First of all, what does it mean for the United States? Will they veto it or not? Most probably they will veto it for many, many reasons. But let's say they do not veto it and the resolution is passed, then it has a legal holding under Chapter 6. No sanctions yet, but it can be a slippery slope because once you have one resolution in the Security Council which is not being upheld, and Israel will not follow it, of course, and will not fulfill it, then you can call for another Security Council resolutions and another one, and in an escalatory way, all the way to enforcing something. I don't think this will be very easy to do, but this is where the Palestinians they're threatening us with sanctions, and they're threatening the United States with isolation.
So in one way or another, if it's impossible, why the Palestinians are doing it?
I think I said it here even before that actually I believe that President Abbas deep inside wants to hear the no answer from the US, the veto from the Americans. Because by that, the minute that the Americans will put the veto on this call of the Palestinians to recognize them as a state, I think that Mahmoud Abbas would be portrayed as a local patriot, as someone who's really fighting the war. You know, he always did not enjoy the same image that Yasser Arafat had. Arafat was Abu Ammar, the warrior, the fighter. Abu Mazen didn't have this, Mahmoud Abbas didn't have this. So I think that he's looking for that, and maybe by being vetoed by the Americans, he will get some kind of reputation as someone who really fought in the diplomatic war with Israel.
So what is exactly the subtext of the message that he's sending to Benjamin Netanyahu today?
No, I think that right now we're witnessing, then again, an attempt that both sides are looking to lower down the flames. I don't think that the Palestinian Authority is interested right now in a third uprising. Of course not the State of Israel, not Jordan, not Egypt. None of the sides that are involved in this conflict is interested in anything like that. This is why I think that there are many pressures being made by the Jordanians, not only on Israel, but also on the Palestinian Authority, to calm down the situation, wait for the American initiative, for Kerry's initiative, and then to see what will happen after.
According to what we're seeing on the ground, do you really think that it can be escalated to a third intifada? That it can, because you sat down here and you said we are watching some kind of a small-scale intifada inside a local one. Can it really, on the ground, from what we're saying, we remember the second intifada, we remember what came before the second intifada. We remember even the first intifada. It was not that. It was totally different. And the Palestinians this time have even more to lose than the second intifada. So look, can it really happen on the ground?
I will try to explain it in the most simple way possible. I think that two major motives or two major reasons prevented the West Bank from getting into a third uprising, even during the war in Gaza. One is the lack of interest or lack of will from the people themselves, for going for another escalation or an uprising. Number two, it's the Palestinian Authority itself, meaning the security forces that prevented many demonstrations and many of the organizations to do what they want to do. And I think that if at some point we will lose the Palestinian Authority as a wall that stops the people from going into a third uprising, we will be in a problem. I do not mean to say that the people would like to go to a third uprising, but I think that one of the two major reasons for why not having an intifada right now will be missing from that. This is why right now we're not there yet, but if something big, if some kind of a spark will start, Al-Aqsa, of course, it's the simple and the most known spark. If something will start over there, a fire can spread very easily all over.
Yeah, I think that one of the messages that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sent today is to the far right movement in Israel by Moshe Feiglin going up to the Temple Mount. Right now, Shai Ben Ari, our correspondent, is in Jerusalem. Shai, like Avi just said here in the studio, President Mahmoud Abbas welcomed, let's say, relaxing message that Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu sent. What is the current situation in Jerusalem? Because it seems that it's calming down, relatively calming down.
Right, Lucy, you could say that. Certainly, there seems to be a calming down over the past day or so, despite that rather controversial visit by member of Knesset Feiglin to the Temple Mount. Over the past few hours, there haven't really been any noteworthy incidents. This has more or less been the situation since last Friday, when there was really an expectation that violence could break out in the wake of Friday prayers. We were here that morning, and you could see the police were blocking off the streets, and I think the fact that things didn't break out into more violence, there were some minor incidents, but the fact that it didn't break out into any sort of major escalation, you could say that the police had something to do with that, and that they were actually preventing some of the more radical elements from both sides from getting anywhere near the Temple Mount and the Old City in general. Another thing that may have had an effect was Mother Nature herself. In fact, it was quite rainy on Friday, and I think a lot of people were actually kept at home because of the weather conditions. And it's interesting to get that reminder every once in a while that even the weather can have some sort of effect on the geopolitical situation in this area and others, of course.
So maybe the weather is what is sending Secretary John Kerry to the region. Do you hear any optimism from this new visit of Kerry to the region, or trying to, let's say, bring the two sides together?
Well, you know, there is perhaps a little ray of optimism here, especially in the wake of that statement that we saw from President Abbas. You know, it's not often we heard the statement basically praising Netanyahu's earlier statement, calling on restraint and putting a particular focus on members of the Israeli right wing, calling on them not to provoke the situation on the Temple Mount. It's pretty rare, certainly over the past few months, we've seen very few instances where these two leaders have been on the same page. That currently seems to be the situation, at least in concerning this issue of the Temple Mount. Whether that can actually lead to any sort of progress or new developments, say, on the negotiation table, it may be a little early for that, but we'll have to see exactly how this meeting between John Kerry and Saeb Erekat turns out tomorrow. Who knows, perhaps we'll see some sort of new initiatives.
Yes, Shai Ben Ari, thank you very much for this. The last time that we sat down and here on 924 News and spoke with Saeb Erekat, it seems that he just gave up. He gave up on the peace process. He gave up on the Israelis. He's saying that even Mahmoud Abbas gave up on the Israelis. We're seeing the right wing trying to do some attempts to flare up the situation all over again. We're seeing, on the other hand, Mahmoud Abbas today welcoming what Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu had to say. And again, we are seeing some steps that the Palestinian president is doing towards Israel. The question is, will Israel lose again this opportunity to maybe sit down and go one step towards the Palestinians?
Well, opportunities have been lost, unfortunately, because mainly the Palestinian side. But I would say here, the issue is right now whether Kerry comes into it, and I welcome, of course, his intervention, is that if he is trying again to reach something which is unreachable, namely a permanent status solution it will fail because there are no political solutions, there are no strategical solutions, there are not even physical solutions that fit. So what happened so far is that the two sides are playing in a masquerade, trying to blame each other. I believe if there is a real leadership and statesmanship in Washington, they would go for what is possible, and that is a long-term permanent agreement. And they can do it with sovereignty, independence to the Palestinians, a Palestinian state without all the final borders, the recognition and security for Israel. And by this, I think it's a win-win, both for the PA and Abbas and for Israel, and the losers will be Hamas.
So explain to me how come the Prime Minister is how is he going to solve this situation if even the Prime Minister, Benjamin Netanyahu, is not able to control his own government? He is not able to control what Moshe Feiglin, for example, is doing, because going to the Temple Mount and visiting this place right now in this specific point is, I will say, on the edge of stupidity.
What he's doing now, Prime Minister, two things. First of all, he's coming down, and I think what he made sure today in the government to establish that the status quo in the Temple Mount is sacrosanct. That means the message was not just for the Palestinians and the Jordanians, and we saw the very, very harsh rhetorics from King Abdullah of Jordan about this. He is, allaying their fears, but also to this extreme right, the radical right on the Israeli side. Don't go there because we will not allow it to change the status quo. But this is something, just an obstacle that is artificial, because this can be moved out of the way by keeping the status quo, and the status quo will be kept. The question is, do we launch on a political process for the next 2 years of Obama? If again they will talk about something which is unreachable, final status, within a deadline which is also not logical and not realistic, 9 months, a year, then I think we will find ourselves all in a box again. I think we have to think differently, and I believe as much as the Palestinians and Saeb Arikat and Mahmoud Abbas are saying we are so much against interim because they're afraid the interim will become the permanent, if this is forced upon them and they will become independent state, including sovereignty over Gaza, they will reluctantly take it, and I think they will benefit from it as well.
So I will take the point that here Ambassador Ayalon mentioned, and it's Jordan. How come Jordan is waking up all of a sudden? How come Jordan is suddenly wants to be a part of this new regional game, or to... Because we didn't hear King Abdullah saying too many things about the Palestinians and the Israelis fighting together, and he's suddenly talking too much.
You're right about that, but the minute that Jerusalem is in the picture, that Al-Aqsa is in the picture, that the Jordanians are still thinking of themselves as the gods of Al-Aqsa, Al-Haram al-Sharif, meaning just like the Saudis are the protectives of Mecca and Medina, so they are responsible for Al-Haram al-Sharif. And this is why the minute that this Temple Mountain stepped into the picture, so of course we heard the Hashemite kingdom. Now, it's not only because of the Jordanians waking up, it's also because of the help of some of the rivals in the Middle East, rivals of the Jordanians that are helping them to wake up, meaning Al Jazeera, Qatar, the Muslim Brotherhood, that are pointing a finger at the Hashemite kingdom and saying, you're not doing anything to help the Muslims in Al-Haram al-Sharif. Look, Israel is preventing Muslims from going into the mountain, and you, the Jordanians, just do not do enough. So Al Jazeera is taking a very critical line against Jordan, and this has also helped them to wake up and to say something.
And it got nothing to do with the fact that Egypt, in one way or another, played a big role in the last operation between Israel and Hamas?
No, I don't think so. I think that there's a kind of a shared interest between Jordan and Egypt. They see eye to eye the whole process, meaning they don't like Hamas. Well, maybe they hate Hamas. That's the more right word for that. Then they think that in order to keep the radicals away from this region, you need to revive the peace process. You need to have some kind of a political solution between Israelis and Palestinians.
Which is very interesting, because we started with this with the Arab League, and the Arab League seems that it's talking a lot and not doing a lot, and it didn't do, because one of the biggest maybe claims that the Palestinians and maybe the Muslims around the world have towards the Arab League is that they are not seeing anything behind what they want, behind money. They are not watching after the Muslim world. They're seeing Muslims are being massacred in Syria, for example, and they're not doing anything. The Arab League is not looking to do some significant moves towards one significant move towards the Palestinians?
Not at all. This is not the organization that will act. This is just a kind of a symbolic organization that exists there in order to let the Arab leaders to talk and to say how much they are fighting for on behalf of the Palestinians. Not more than that. The Arab League is an anachronistic organization, completely incapable of doing anything in order to change the reality.
So let's see if the Israelis agreed with you. We asked Israelis on the street if they think the Arab League should intervene in the status of Jerusalem. Let's see what they had to say.
I don't think the Arab League should intervene with what's happening in Jerusalem because Israel is a sovereign state. So I don't think any country should be involved in what's going on in Israel, not the USA or not friends of Israel. Only Israel can take care of what's happening here.
I think the Arab League should not get involved. This is an Israeli and Palestinian issue, and Jordan is related to it for historical reasons. What we should work towards is an agreement between Israel and the Palestinians.
I don't see why they should intervene. I think that Israelis and Palestinians have to solve their problems alone.
I don't think so. I've been living in Jerusalem for 28 years. We've had much bigger problems in the past, and we've solved them. I work with Arabs, they're my neighbors. We can solve these issues on our own. When the international community gets involved, the problems grow bigger, and so does the reaction.
So maybe the situation is a little bit less complicated than we are showing it to the world?
I think the most important factor right now is for the government of Israel, who has the responsibility for security, to keep the status quo. Once the message is gone and is enforced also by Israeli security forces against both extremists on the Palestinian side and the Israeli side, this is the key issue. And secondly, I think it will be an issue on the negotiation table. Jerusalem is one of the core issues on the negotiation table. We have to keep it for a process which will go on when the parties will feel they have no other choice. I'm not sure this is the case right now. I think Kerry may give another last try. I think it's important for all of us here. But the most important thing about the Arab League, I think, is not doing the Palestinians any favor, quite the contrary.
And let me just guess that I believe that he will leave Jerusalem to the end, and after they will solve all the problems, they will talk Jerusalem, and then we will have another problem.
Jerusalem, I think, Lucy, is even more problematic than the refugees issue.
It always has been. Gentlemen, thank you very much for coming, and we're going out for a small break, 2 minutes, and I'll be back with the rest of the news today. Don't go anywhere. The Arab League holds an emergency meeting over violence in Jerusalem as Israel braces for further escalation and debates new measures to prevent it. This, as U.S. Secretary of State John Kerry plans to meet Chief Palestinian negotiator Saeb Erekat to discuss reviving the frozen peace process. Israel closes its last two crossings into the Gaza Strip, leaving the coastal enclave even more isolated in the face of a massive new buffer zone being built on the Egyptian side. And Ukraine's military reports intensive troop movement from Russia into disputed regions in the east, where pro-Russian separatists are holding a controversial election that Moscow has vowed to uphold. Welcome back. Israel closed today the Kerem Shalom and Erez checkpoints following rocket fire on Friday, along with the expected buffer zone being built. On the Egyptian side, the Palestinian population in Gaza is once again facing isolation. I-24 News reporter Owa Shapira with more.
Violence incidents over the last few days, both in Israel and Egypt, have put Gazans in a corner once again. Israel Sunday moved to close the Kerem Shalom and Erez crossing points after a rocket fired from Gaza landed in the southern Eshkol Regional Council. The crossings are a key point in the movement of people and goods.
The continuation of closing the crossings, maintaining the siege, and not doing the reconstruction process in Gaza is not acceptable for the Palestinian parties, who will always be ready to face Israel.
Only a few days ago, Egypt began evacuating its citizens and demolishing homes along its border with Gaza to create a buffer zone, leaving the Palestinians trapped once again inside the strip. A series of terror attacks in Egypt came to a peak last week, with at least 33 casualties in the Sinai Peninsula, sparking President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi to strengthen his policy. Egypt suspended expected Hamas-Israel talks and started to build a planned buffer zone, expected at around 13 kilometers long and 500 meters deep. As expected, many Palestinians are not pleased with the move.
A buffer zone is just a plot against the Palestinian people. We are brothers with the Egyptians, and we do not interfere with their border.
Only a few weeks ago, the future of Gaza seemed much brighter. A month after Operation Protective Edge, an international conference in Cairo brought pledges of some $5.4 billion to rebuild Gaza. But 2.5 months after the war between Israel and Hamas came to an end, Gaza residents are clearly isolated.
And we will go, of course, further into this issue later in the show with our panelists in the daily debate. And still in the Mideast, while focus is on the Islamic State terror group, a Syrian NGO reports the Assad government has dropped hundreds of barrel bombs on provinces in the country in the past several weeks in an effort to stop rebel forces. And while U.S. coalition forces continue to fight the IS and Kobani, Bashar al-Assad's regime may be benefiting in the aftermath. More from Ayman Siksik.
Around 20,000 Kurds rallied across Turkey to show support for Kobani after Iraqi Kurds arrived in the embattled town to reinforce Syrian fighters against the IS. Turkey finally authorized 150 Iraqi Kurds to cross the border into Kobani last week, in a move that sparked criticism over Turkey's commitment to the fight. But in a media address in France, Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan said it's time for Western leaders to advance into other towns in Syria and Iraq.
Why Kobani? And why not other towns in Syria? Why not Iraq, 30% of which is occupied? Why aren't we advancing there? Why are we only advancing in Kobani?
Erdogan's claims are not misplaced. Opposition rebel forces have reportedly been frustrated by the coalition's narrow focus on Kobani and its disregard of the wider Syrian conflict. According to the Syrian Observatory for Human Rights, Syrian warplanes have dropped at least 401 barrel bombs on rebel areas in 8 provinces in the country, killing mostly civilians. Coalition strikes have been targeting IS strongholds to a greater extent than Syrian military forces or infrastructure. Ironically, this resulted in helping President Bashar al-Assad against one of his most powerful and influential threats. While the fight against the IS brings together unlikely allies, Assad's rule over Syria appears to be holding power. So far, Kobani has been under siege for 6 weeks, in a battle that has left an approximate 800 dead and forced more than 200,000 to flee across the Turkish border.
Moving to the fight against IS, but in Iraq, where the terror group's advance has fueled near daily sectarian bombings and shootings. The Iraqi Air Force is striking IS targets in Anbar province after the execution of some 300 members of the Bu Nimr tribe over the last few days. Alongside it, the group's mastermind Abu Bakr al-Baghdadi issued a memo saying spies have joined IS and now its future strategy, and that IS is now in a dangerous situation. Let's hope so. And with me now from Erbil in Iraq is journalist Hermione G. Hermione, good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Hi, good evening. Thanks for having me.
Good to see you again. So we're hearing al-Baghdadi saying that the situation is dangerous to the IS right now. Do they feel it? Do you feel it on the ground in Iraq?
Well, certainly they've seen some losses in the last week or so. The Iraqi army managed to take an important strategic town just south of Baghdad about a week ago. The Kurdish forces managed to reclaim the town of Zumar, which is very strategic, and from where they're hoping to launch an attack into Sinjar and then into Mosul and try and reclaim those areas. So certainly the IS have had some setbacks recently. However, I mean, as you mentioned, the situation in Anbar is still very, very difficult for the residents and for the Iraqi forces. But what we have seen is as the IS have been losing ground, they have started executing people. I mean, obviously the huge number in Anbar province, 300 or so, but even before that, they were executing people in Mosul who they considered to be a threat or competition. So they clearly do feel somewhat that they are losing ground, particularly perhaps within the populations of the areas that they are controlling at the moment.
So, we heard a lot of criticism about this coalition and about the airstrikes, but although we're hearing this horrifying execution of 300 people, but it seems that in one way or another, it's working. Do the forces, the Iraqi forces, feel that?
Well, certainly the Peshmerga forces do feel that. I was in Zumar a couple of days ago, just after they'd retaken the town from the IS, and by all accounts, it was a perfect example of the coalition strategy working, namely US airstrikes taking out the IS headquarters, IS armored vehicles and so on, followed up by Peshmerga forces who are armed with heavy weapons that they've been given by the international coalition. So in that instance, it's been very effective. However, unfortunately, places like Anbar are the real threat, and there the situation is much more difficult. And as we've seen, it's much harder for the Iraqi forces and the international forces to make such clear gains in areas like Anbar where the IS have much greater control, and also they're very heavily mixed in with residential populations, so it's more difficult to attack sort of as directly.
Yes, Hermione G., always good to speak with you. Thank you very much for this.
Thank you.
And we're going to Russia. Pro-Russian separatists in the eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk are holding elections today, a week after the rest of the country chose a pro-European parliament. As expected, the elections haven't gone over quietly, with Ukraine warning Russia has sent troops into the east. I-24 News reporter Uri Shapira has more.
A week after pro-European parties swept the Kiev parliament, another vote is taking place in Ukraine, this time only for the eastern regions of Luhansk and Donetsk. Leaders of the self-proclaimed republics are trying to cope with a complex situation where they may be elected by the people, but remain unrecognized by the Ukrainian government and by the majority of European countries.
Of course, it's understandable that we're going to have to talk with Kiev, but we aren't planning for that in the near future. Today we're going to have the election, and we'll see Kiev's reaction and start from there.
No big surprises are expected. Most of the leaders are running against unknown candidates and are likely to win easily. But the fact that these elections are even taking place at all is the issue here. 6 months after the residents of these regions voted yes for self-determination in special referendum, again unrecognized by Kiev and the West, today the people of Luhansk and Donetsk are more convinced by their choice than ever.
We voted for the self-proclaimed Luhansk People's Region leader Igor Plotnitsky, who supports our people there, builds peace for us there.
Meanwhile, Russia continues its provocation along the Ukrainian border. The Ukrainian army reported on Sunday on an intensive movement of troops and equipment coming from the Russian side towards the eastern regions. And as of Friday, Russia held a military drill in the Rostov region only a few kilometers away from the Ukrainian border. According to the UN, more than 4,000 people have died in the conflict in eastern Ukraine since its inception. Though the war's focus has shifted away from the crisis, today it seems Ukraine is more divided than ever.
And And joining us via phone, Mideast Bureau Chief for Russia Today, Paula Slier, is in Donetsk for the elections. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you very much for having me.
So, Paula, although the West is discounting the vote, how likely is it to count?
Look, I mean, you have very much the expected reactions. You have Russia saying that this is an important election, that it will recognize the results, and that it gives legitimacy to the leadership here in eastern Ukraine. What we're hearing from the West is that according to the truce that was signed, these elections could only be held under the Ukrainian law in December. But what the Russians are arguing is that according to that very same agreement that brought about the ceasefire, the agreement was that the elections would be held in coordination with and not in line with the Ukrainian government. I think no one's really that surprised that there's such a difference of reaction to the fact that these elections have gone ahead.
So do you think that this, let's say, new move, this move that they're doing is going to create some kind of a new mess?
It's very difficult to predict if more of a new mess can be created. I mean, at the moment, the situation is calmer than it has been for weeks. There is not the kind of shelling that you saw happening here the last time you and I spoke a few weeks ago. What I do want to say is that within the next hour, the polls will close. They were extended because of the large number of people that came out to vote. And I did spend the day visiting several polling stations here in Donetsk. And very much the reaction of people here in eastern Ukraine is the same it's been for a year now, and that is that they want to participate in this parliamentary and presidential poll. They believe that they're deciding their own future, their own fate. So the sentiments being expressed on the ground are the same sentiments that have been expressed all along. What people here say is that in the same way that Kiev held its own parliamentary poll a short time ago, they should be allowed to go ahead and do the same in eastern Ukraine in what they see as their independent republics of Lugansk and Donetsk.
So all this you're saying, although we're hearing that basically the Russian has sent troops?
Again, you know, there's a lot of question marks. What we are hearing is reports in the Western media that up to something like 90 trucks are passing through eastern Ukraine, that these trucks have no military insignia, but they have on board multiple rocket launchers and other weapons. The Russians, for their side, and certainly here in eastern Ukraine, the people I've been talking to keep saying to me, well, where are these trucks? Because we certainly haven't seen any on the ground. And even the Western media that's making these claims is citing social media as a source. Now, there have been such allegations and reports in the past, very difficult to independently verify them. What I can say is that there was a humanitarian convoy of huge trucks that were clearly marked humanitarian that made their way today from Ukraine back into Russia.
Yeah, you know, I think in one way or another, again, like we're watching what we're seeing the situation, we'll have to wait and see how this situation is going to deteriorate or not. Paul Slier, thank you very much for this. Tuesday is election day in the U.S. with a number of key races in the Senate set to determine the political landscape in Washington for the next 2 years. With Republicans making gains in the polls recently, Democrats are looking to mobilize their base in a last-ditch attempt to retain control of the upper house of Congress. I-24 News correspondent Shai Ben-Ari has more.
As Tuesday's U.S. midterm election draws near, candidates and campaigns are shifting into high gear for the final stretch. The most critical battleground now is the Senate, where a Republican turnaround is looking like a distinct possibility.
Republicans seem to be in pretty good shape to get at least 5 seats, which would end up in a 50-50 Senate, but they also have a possibility of getting that 6th seat, which would give them outright majority control.
The latest poll averages predict 47 seats going Republican, a gain of 2 seats in comparison with last week's polls. 8 other Senate races are currently seen as toss-ups, able to go either way.
I think everybody's paying attention to Iowa and Colorado. People are interested in what's going to happen in Alaska. Arkansas and Louisiana seem very competitive.
Much of the Republican strategy in this election is focused on linking Democratic candidates to some of the more controversial policies put in place by President Barack Obama.
In January, President Obama refers to the Islamic State as a JV team. Days later, the Armed Services Committee holds a hearing on new global threats. Senator Kay Hagan, absent. While ISIS grew, Obama kept waiting, and Kay Hagan kept quiet. The price for their failure is danger.
May I have the definition, please?
Pryor, a Washington liberal out of touch with Arkansas, voted for the Obama agenda 90%.
Prior. O-B-A-M-A.
Close enough.
Even some Democrats are playing down their own links to the president, something not all liberals are happy about.
Clay Aiken, who's running in Congress in North Carolina, recently said about the president, "I have nothing to do with him." Okay, but come Wednesday, Obama will still have a job, whereas I don't know what Clay will be doing. Although I assume it involves a cruise ship and a cover of Copacabana.
Much will hinge on voter turnout on Election Day itself. In the next few days, Democrats will be focusing efforts on mobilizing women and African American voters, two constituencies which could end up being the deciding factors in tight races in Iowa and North Carolina, among others. It's a task that is easier said than done, as midterm elections are often typified by low turnout and general voter disinterest. Some in Washington, and particularly at the White House, will be hoping to buck the trend.
Still in this issue, but economy. And back from Nepal, and now is Neve Ellis, business reporter for the Jerusalem Post. Good evening. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
Was it good?
It was great. Yeah, I avoided all the disasters, so
thank God.
Glad to be back in one piece. Yeah.
In one piece. So midterm elections, and a lot of criticism about Barack Obama foreign policy when he was so concerned about the inner problems of the United States. Was he able to solve any of them? Because it wasn't such a big success also in this department.
Right, so that's the thing. The United States divided government, three branches of government, all fighting against each other. And for the last 2 years, the last couple of years, he's had Republicans that are controlling the House, and now it looks very likely that they're going to control the Senate as well. So he's never been able to just do exactly what he wanted. And one of the things that prevented him early on is this funny thing in the Senate that you can't really do that much if you don't have 60 votes. You don't just need half of it, you need 60 to get a lot done. And that's what's going to save him on the other side, because even if the Republicans win the Senate, they're not going to have 60 votes, so there's still going to be some room for compromise.
So how is this going to affect maybe the next 2 years of his let's say legacy, economic performance?
It can go one of two ways. The question is, what's the Republican Party going to do? There's the Tea Party branch that's a lot more extreme of the Republican Party, and they're basically the party of no, and they don't want to do anything that might possibly make Barack Obama look good. So they might say, well, you know what, we're just going to have to keep blocking and do everything we can. There's another branch of the Republican Party that says, well, we're controlling the House, we're controlling the Senate, we're really going to have to get some things done. And they're going to be passing bills, and those include things about the budget, things about immigration, things about energy that really affect the economy and that really affect all of the United States internally. And they might be sending those things and trying to work with the Democrats in order to get some things done.
If we want to look at right now the status of unemployment in the United States and the salary that he was so aiming to, to change, was he able to change any of those in one way or another?
So there's some good news and there's bad news when it comes to what's happened so far. Is that the unemployment rate was at 10% and now it's at 5.9%. And in a third of the states, it's back at like 5%, which is considered about a normal unemployment rate. So that's a huge improvement. The problem is the wages haven't gone back up. So a lot of people, even though they hear these numbers or they know that they're not working enough, they're not making enough, they're not working in jobs that make the same amount that they used to. So people are still feeling the pinch. And that's a much bigger issue that's harder to take care of.
I don't know if to really feel sorry for Barack Obama for the last 4 years or 8 years, or what about the legacy that he's going to...
I think it can go both ways. I think that with him, it's either that you say, well, it's his fault for not being able to make them compromise more, or he was just in a crappy situation where, no one wanted to work with him.
You know what a Yiddish mom is saying. Like, oish, oish.
Yeah.
Neve Ellis, thank you very much for this.
Thanks for having me.
And a major UN panel on climate change has its say in the newly published synthesis report, and the news isn't good. Severe, widespread, and irreversible global impacts are expected by the end of the 21st century without effective action on carbon. I-24 News correspondent Shachar Peled has the stark details.
If any concrete proof was needed, it has now been officially provided. Humans are altering the Earth's climate system.
We need a fundamental departure from the business as usual scenario.
Following Following a week of intense debate and all-night talks that went on until 5 a.m. Saturday, the most comprehensive assessment of climate change yet undertaken was released Sunday in Copenhagen. Produced by hundreds of scientists of the UN-backed Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, it provides a stark image of what humans have done to their planet. Despite existing mitigation policies, the growth of greenhouse gas emissions has increased over the last decades. The warming of the atmosphere and ocean, the amounts of snow and ice which have diminished, poorer crop yields and the sea level rising are all directly connected to recent emissions of greenhouse gases, the highest ever in history. Some might argue this is hardly news, and indeed the report restates many familiar positions. But the scientists outline an immediate urgency with a clear bottom line. The unrestricted use of fossil fuels must end soon if the world is to avoid dangerous climate change.
We have a very limited window of opportunity, and I think the global community must look at these numbers and show the resolve by which we can bring about change.
Driven largely by economic and population growth, the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide are unprecedented in at least the last 800,000 years. So what could be done? The report suggests renewable energy sources will have to grow from their current 30% share to 80% of the power sector by 2050, and fossil fuels phased out almost entirely by 2100. In Christopher Nolan's newly released film Interstellar, scientists are sent into space to try and find a new home for humanity. It appears that the day this would become a reality could be just around the corner.
We bring you now the story of an Israeli violinist who was unable to play due to a neurological problem that sent tremors through her hands. Thanks to a very unique surgery, she has her hands and her music back. Mael Ben-Uliel and Eli Ochenberg with the story.
Precise gestures, each note played in tune. It's hard to believe that a few days ago, Naomi still suffered from tumors, a condition that prevented her from playing her favorite instruments for over 20 years. The open brain surgery was performed under local anesthetic while she was playing the violin to allow surgeons to locate precisely the area of the brain affected. A real miracle for this former Lithuanian Philharmonic Orchestra violinist. Soon after she immigrated to Israel, Naomi had to give up her passion as doctors diagnosed a neurological disease called essential tumor. This rare condition can affect people of all ages and make precise gestures, such as drinking a glass of water or playing the violin, impossible. Naomi had no choice other than to put her violin aside for all these years. She was only able to teach at the Givatayim Conservatory.
I never kept it secret. I told my students the truth. You're not the only ones who have problems. I have mine too. Your problem is that you can't play, and I have problems with my trembling hands that don't allow me to play correctly, but I can teach.
Naomi didn't realize she couldn't undergo surgery until the day she met Professor Freight's neurology team. Quickly enough, Naomi was convinced of the value of the surgery, despite the real risk of intervention.
It's a well-known surgery. It appears in every medical book, but not all the neurologists think of suggesting it to patients to improve their quality of life.
It took only a few hours in the operating room to plug 4 electrodes into the affected area of Naomi's brain. The electrodes were then connected to a box implanted under her skin. This great medical achievement is called deep brain stimulation and has an immediate effect.
Today I feel very well. They fixed my hands. Yes, I will play violin. I don't play yet, but I will.
In a few days, Naomi will return to teaching violin at the conservatory. From now on, her student will enjoy not only from her lessons, but also from her music.
Unbelievable. Now to sports. And joining me right now is Mirav Savir. Good evening.
Good evening, Lucy.
All good?
Everything's good.
But FIFA is apologizing for something? Again.
FIFA seems to always be in the middle of some
Always.
kind of controversy.
What
Well,
now?
this latest one is apologizing for a map because the 2018 World Cup will be in Russia. They put out an emblem, and the map of Russia, it also had Crimea as part of Russia. Which goes very well
Big
with all the
no-no.
polls in the eastern Ukraine today in the voting. So they came out and apologized, and they also kind of blamed somebody else for it. They said a Russian agency hired to help with the emblem did this. It's not our fault. We just didn't see it.
Oh.
Yeah, they just didn't see it.
It's okay. It's a
They
fair.
decided to not look at it, but that's it doesn't stop there. I mean, Sepp Blatter also he'd previously come out and said after EU and the US called for them not to hold the World Cup there and to boycott Russia, he came out and said, we're not going to do that. And he sat next to Putin during the Summer World Cup in Brazil this year. So maybe there's some kind of little relationship there that's being hinted at in this.
So I'm going to be in New York really soon. Like the marathon is underway.
It is underway. We've already have winners. On the women's side, Mary Keitany came in 2 hours, 25 minutes, and 7 seconds, which is probably how long it'll actually even take me to get to the starting line, let alone finish the marathon, 26.2 miles. It's unbelievable. It's her first time, and it actually comes after Rita Jeptu, who tested positive. She's the winner of both Boston and the Chicago Marathon, kind of shook everything up and gave Mary Keitany this opportunity. And on the men's side, Wilson Kipsang came in first.
Beautiful, beautiful. I'm not going to run this while I'm
So we
going
shouldn't
to be
time
in
you?
New York. No. Totally not.
Another marathon, maybe shopping.
Of course. Definitely. What is it? Is it a question? Mirav Savir, thank you very much. Not a lot of shopping because my banker will hate me afterwards. But in the meantime, we'll go to a break, small break, 2 minutes, and then we will be back for the daily debate. Don't go anywhere. Shopping, 2 minutes. Then we will be back.